Okay, so I'm making a video right now about how many more times, specifically about the snare drum groove that Bonzo plays, the beat for the Hunter section of the song. I've gotten several requests to talk about that particular beat, and Bonzo played this beat differently in the studio on the original recording than he did live. He kind of expanded it and played some variations, played it across the drum set a little bit more actively than he did on the studio version. This is a really cool beat. It's always sounded to me like a New Orleans influenced kind of rhythm. And recently I met the great drummer Stanton Moore. I went to a master class that he gave here in Chicago, and we got into a conversation about Bonham. Turns out he's a huge Bonham fan. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Stanton Moore, you should check him out ASAP. He's an outstanding drummer and an incredible teacher. He has a drum academy. It's Stanton Moore Drum Academy online, and you can sign up for it and become a member, and you have access to scores of written lessons, videos that demonstrate various grooves and fills. Very, very helpful and rich resource for learning about New Orleans drumming in particular, but all kinds of drumming, really. He's a great guy and a great player and a great fan of Bonzo as well. So we got into this conversation about the drumming on a Meters track. That's the name of the tune is Africa. And he was bringing up a live version from Live on the Queen Mary, which is a great recording of that particular song. But the original studio version is on an album called Rejuvenation. So I'm not too adept at dropping audio clips in and out of these videos, but you can go to the video here on YouTube and find the song. Rejuvenation is the name of the album. The song is Africa. And on that song, Zigaboo plays a beat that is reminiscent of what Bonzo played on How Many More Times. Now, How Many More Times, of course, was recorded in 1968, and I believe that Africa is from the early 70s, maybe 73, 74 is when that album came out. So it's possible that Zig heard Bonzo's beat and liked it. It's also maybe more likely that it's a New Orleans street type rhythm that he adapted to the drum set. And I think that Bonzo, because he was a big fan of great New Orleans drummer Earl Palmer, may have picked up on this either by osmosis or directly through his affinity for Earl Palmer's drumming. Earl Palmer is another legendary drummer, played on countless sessions, one of the most recorded drummers of all time. And if you haven't checked out Earl Palmer, Google him, look him up. There's a lot of really great stuff available online as well about him, his history, and his drumming. So, basically, the beat that Bonzo plays on the studio version is pretty much all on the snare, and it's got a couple flam type accents with a cymbal crash on beat 4. But it's pretty straightforward, but there is some slightly complex bass drum work in it too. So I'm going to just play the beat and then break it down a little bit. So this is the studio version beat of How Many More Times, the Hunter section. Okay, so let's look at the parts of this beat. The snare drum part sounds like this. So it sounds to me like usually he's starting with a rough, which is a 2-stroke rough with the left hand. Okay, so after the first two beats, there's a flam. Just repeating that so you can see the sticking and hear the phrase. I'll do it slower. Okay, now the second half of that bar is this. Okay, slowly. See how that lines up? You've got a double stroke on the bass drum before the cymbal crash. Played slowly together. Okay, so that's the beat. And the reason we got into this discussion about the beat that Zigaboo plays on Africa is, to both Stanton and myself, it really has some similarity, even though it's not the same. But what's more striking is I haven't heard too many examples of a drummer playing that type of beat, a snare drum funk beat, basically, is what it is, because you've got this. Now on Africa, the beat is something like this. This is going to be a rough approximation, but it's basically this. So there's a lot of variations happening with the way Zig plays that beat, but the crux of it is it doesn't sound to me like he's always playing the same bass drum pattern, but that's basically what it is. There's the Bonzo style inserted. The difference is Bonham is playing a double stroke. Zig is playing. Now moving along, I got a request to break down the beat that he plays on the Danish TV special, which is from the official DVD. So on that particular version, when they break down into this section, he starts it out on the snare drum similar to the studio version, which then kind of quickly morphs into the way he would do it more often subsequently. So I believe that the Danish TV special is from sometime in early to mid '69. Okay, so this is basically what he does. He starts it out, Then he goes into starting on the floor tom, and he plays from the floor tom up to the tom and then back down like this. take the left hand up to the tom, which is basically the same way he played it on the Royal Albert Hall video and on most live concerts that I've heard from that era, from 1970 and onward. So again, now that particular beat starts with the floor tom, and then a flam between the tom and the snare. So you've got, and it's not always a double on the bass drum. You could, but it seems to me like he changed the beat a bit, and instead of playing, now he's playing. Then he moves to the tom for the end of the phrase. Slight variation there. You could play the double stroke on the bass drum as well, which he does often. I'm just saying he doesn't always do exactly the same pattern every time, which maybe that's overstating the obvious, but it is important to remember that Bonzo was a highly spontaneous drummer, and you should be too. So when you practice this stuff, you get it down first of all in a way that's comfortable for you to get a handle on all the different parts, but then it's important to free it up and throw some variations in there on it. So again, here we go. That was a little variation that I actually heard him do on the Danish TV special. He throws in a little quick bass drum double stroke, like this. Now that's something that I notice he does on Royal Albert Hall. He starts to actually play the bass drum and the hi-hat kind of similar to the Bonham engine, or this. Okay, but he's playing that rhythm. It just gives it a whole lot of extra sound, a lot more volume and power and drive to the beat. So that's basically the How Many More Times snare drum beat broken down. I hope you find this video helpful, and thanks for watching, as always.